Welcome to the name, image, and likeness session in the policy track of the Gazette's annual Iowa Ideas Conference. I'm your moderator, John Steppe. I cover Iowa Hawkeyes football for the Gazette. We have a great panel today for this conversation on what's been a fascinating topic over the last year as we've been in the early stages of the NIL era of college sports. Before we get started, a quick reminder that you can send any questions you have throughout the session to us via the chat function. And now I will turn over to our panelists to introduce themselves with their name, job title, and how NIL affects them. So let's start off with David.
Good afternoon. I'm David Harris, Director of Athletics here at the University of Northern Iowa. In our position, NIL impacts us primarily in that we're trying to help our student athletes understand the opportunities that are in front of them. How can we provide the appropriate education and assistance so that they can take advantage of this new door that has been opened? So the better we are at that, I think the more attractive we are as an institution to student athletes who are considering University of Northern Iowa.
And then Lyla.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lyla Cleary. I am the Senior Associate Athletics Director for Compliance and Sports Performance at the University of Iowa. So dealing with NLI, I similar along the lines of what David said is I think our role is to really educate our student athletes to put them in the best position to take full advantage if they choose within this NIL space. And at the same time, to help arm our coaches to be able to help their student athletes in that space as well.
And last but not least, Brad.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Brad Heinrichs. I'm the president of the Swarm. We are unattached from the University of Iowa Athletics, but we have an organization that tries to empower our student athletes to profit from their name, image, and likeness, but different than many other collectives across the country, we're asking them to earn their money by help doing good acts in the community to benefit those around us.
And then Brad, I'll start off with you. How was your path is you're a full-time actuary, right?
That's right. Yeah. My day job is to be an actuary. I run a national actuarial firm. But once upon a time, many years ago, I was a student athlete at the University of Iowa, and I grew fond of the university, not even being a native Iowan. And I feel like I owe a lot to the University of Iowa because they really took care of me in my formative years. And when this name, image, likeness thing came about, it became pretty clear to me that there's a right way of doing this and a wrong way of doing this. And I wanted to step forward to try to help do things the Iowa way and make it so that these kids can get what's coming to them, rightfully so, but in a manner that Iowans can be proud of.
And then as you're talking about doing things the right way, that's a great segue into my next question for Lyla. As someone working in compliance, what has the past year plus looked like considering the lack of NIL enforcement from the NCAA?
If I had to sum it up in one word, I'd probably say chaos. It's been a very different space than what the people who work in the world of compliance are used to. Where we started on July 1 of 2021 is very different than where we are even today. And it's a difficult space to be in when we're in a space where we're used to going to the conference office or to the NCAA for guidance and direction. And in this particular space, they were unable to do that. They said they were not answering any questions in regards to NIL. And so it was left up to each institutional discretion, which, depending on what state you were in, could lead you down a different path. And so just not really having the concrete direction and information that we could pass along to our student athletes, to those people that were interested in working in that NIL space and with our coaches, it was just very difficult because you might see some activities going on at other schools that that just don't feel right or don't seem right. working in the space that we're used to, but then not seeing any response or enforcement from the NCAA. So it's just been a really trying year and trying to figure out, how do we at the University of Iowa respond and participate within the space and still feel comfortable and confident in what we do and what our mission has always been in serving our student athletes. So it's been a little chaotic. I don't know how much better the next year will be, but hopefully eventually soon we'll be on a better path.
And then a question for everybody, and I'll start with David on this one. Do you believe a national NIL law would help? And do you think it would happen?
That's a great question. I don't know if it will happen. I think there is a benefit, certainly, if everyone is playing by the same set of rules. And so I think that's what you hear within our industry. And Lyla just mentioned, a state by state, if you have state laws and your state is more permissive than mine, then that creates somewhat of a competitive advantage. And all of us working in athletics certainly have, over time, gotten very sensitive to anything that we think is a competitive advantage or a disadvantage. And so I know that there's been talk for a while about the need for one standard that would apply to everyone, a national standard. So I don't know if that's where we're going to end up. I don't know if the momentum in that area is as significant as it was even a few months ago. But certainly anything that would govern that we're all playing by the same set of rules, I think is valuable for people who work in college athletics.
Lyla, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I definitely think at this point in time, the only way to kind of right ship this is with some national federal assistance. I don't believe anymore that the NCAA has the power or authority that can get this back in line and regulate this the way that it needs to. And so we're at the point where I think we do need national federal assistance, and that doesn't happen quickly. And so that's going to be the tough part, is getting it to actually make its way all the way through legislation and get put into place. When we're not working on a even playing field, it makes it really difficult.
And then Brad, what's your perspective on this from a collective standpoint?
It's the same. I mean, obviously having clear rules makes our lives easier. On the national scale, obviously, you know, having a one set of rules would be nice. I think that it's really a two-step process, though. Somebody who makes laws has to decide that we need one set of rules. Once you accomplish that, though, you got to figure out what those rules are. And I think that it'll be easier to cross the first hurdle, deciding that we need a set of rules. I think there will be a lot of disagreement, however, when they start talking about, well, what do these rules look like? Because I think there will be varying points of view as to who should be able to do what and how.
And then I think we've all seen probably the headlines about a lot of prominent athletes getting NIL deals. Caitlin Clark just, I think, is this week having the Nike deal. David, are you seeing much NIL activity among your athletes at UNI?
We're seeing some, and I think for us, the majority of what we're seeing either has to do with student athletes starting their own camps and clinics, either here in the area or in their hometown, or compensation that they're receiving through social media posts. So connecting with a company or organization and then being paid whatever is the negotiated amount based on what they're doing from social media. So I don't know that any of those have resulted in any large scale deals, but at least from a frequency standpoint, that seems to be what we're seeing more than anything here on our campus.
And does that come up much as your coaches are trying to recruit?
So I'm not in the conversations with the coaches, so I couldn't speak to that with any real authority, but I would just say anecdotally, and from conversations that I have when I meet with recruits, is that it does come up from time to time, and it depends on the sport and depends on the student athlete or prospective student athlete and what they're looking for. And so we try to do our best to make sure they understand that our responsibility really is to provide education. We're not in the business of trying to facilitate NIL deals. That's one of the foundational things that you're not supposed to be doing in this space, but we do want them to know that if they decide to come to the university, that there are deals out there for those who put together the infrastructure to go out and pursue them the right way. And they can make money if they can, get connected to advisors, financial advisors, attorneys, and others who can advise them the best way to protect themselves and to maximize the opportunity.
And then, Brad, you have a relatively unique approach with the Swarm Collective on using nonprofits as a way to kind of facilitate things, I guess you'd say. How did that idea come about?
Well, that's a good question. Going back to what I said about doing things the right way, having spent some time in Iowa, it was clear to me that Iowans care about community. And it's also clear to me that when NIL came out, there was a really strong negative connotation. There still is to some level, right? And I thought, you know what? The best way for Iowa to do this and be successful and have Iowans actually get behind this would be to link up this concept with the community in some way, shape, or form. And so that's one of the reasons I stepped forward to try to start this initiative. So far, we've given out, we've paid over $100,000 to student athletes in the first 3 months that we've been up and running. But these student athletes have also done hundreds of hours of community service to warrant those payments. So our community here in Eastern Iowa is already benefiting from the work of the Swarm. And I can't be more excited than I am today about the progress we've made in such a short period of time.
And I believe this is a big week for you with that community service work as well.
It is. We're this week we're swarming the community, as we're trying to say. There's an event every single day, whether it's with the big brothers, big sisters, or with local schools. I think we may be doing something with the wheelchair basketball group. I should know the name, but I don't offhand. In any event, there's a different event every single day that our student athletes can sign up for, where they can volunteer their time and their celebrity, so to speak, to work with kids and influence them in the right way. And you may or may not be surprised. Our student athletes are tripping over themselves to sign up for this. They really are excited about the work that we're doing, and you see some of the social media posts out there. And so it's been a great week so far.
And then, Lyla, there were early reports in kind of the first few months of NIL of some companies coming in and offering contracts to athletes that give up their rights in perpetuity. Is that something that you had to deal with at Iowa?
Yeah, we definitely saw that too. But what we've done is we continue our message with the athletes is that we are there to educate you. And so we want to give them the tools and the resources to handle their NIL experiences appropriately. And so we were not able to advise them on their legal contract. So we would refer them to various folks. There's entities on campus that can do that. Or even local providers that do that. But we raised those questions for them and gave them some of those keywords that, like, here's what you look for when you're signing these contracts, and don't sign it without reading it, even if it is 10 pages, because we definitely saw that. We saw that early on. But that was one thing that campus made clear from the beginning, is that we could not provide legal advice on their contracts because we were not a party to that contract. But we've seen it. It's gotten much better. But even when we still see some of those come through, we're like, you might want to read this one again.
and John, that one, and Lyla, one of the things that we provide, one of the services we provide at Swarm is to help our student athletes with the legal aspect of contracts, and I know Lyla can't get involved there, but we will. We're looking out for the student athletes independently, and so that service is available for them as well.
Was that something you originally planned to be part of Swarm, or was that a case of, oh wow, this is a need here that we can fulfill?
It was a secondary thought, really. Obviously, you want to protect the student athletes. You want to make sure that they're not signing unconscionable contracts. You want to make sure that when it comes time to do something they've never done before, which is pay taxes, they understand how to go about that. And so that's again, I know Lila's group probably spends some time with student athletes on that as well, but there are certain things we want to try to be paternalistic as an organization, and as you know, some college kids still need a lot of assistance. So that's what we're doing.
And then Lyla, what's been your approach on how to educate athletes on taxes, contracts, all these little things that I think most 18-year-olds probably don't think about?
Yeah, we've tried a couple of different options just because one set doesn't work for everybody. Last spring, we partnered with a couple of folks and did an online NIL summit, almost similar probably to what this is here today, and had various speakers come in about branding themselves, about taxes and finances and all of those things. We've now we've been able to do some in-person education training systems. We've worked with people from our campus, from the College of Law, from the John Papajohn Entrepreneurship Institute. And so just kind of trying to bring in the resources that can help satisfy their need of what they need to best position themselves. In addition, we partner with an outside entity called Influencer. So that's a mobile app through their phone that at any point in time, they can select a topic and watch a short video about it, and then request additional information and continue to identify, whether this person wants to talk about branding themselves and the next person is more interested in, starting up their own business, and taxes and all of those things. So we've tried to put out different options. We've partnered with another group that comes in 2 or 3 times a year to do those in-person sessions, because what we find is, we're with the students all year long. They don't want to continue to hear from us about everything. And so we bring in outside sources to give them a fresh voice and a fresh take on different things.
And then David, you have a unique perspective on the big picture as a member of the NCAA's Division I Council. What conversations have come up there about NIL, and what are the concerns you're hearing from your colleagues across the country?
The biggest conversation is one that we mentioned earlier, and we haven't talked about it as much here recently, but I would say over the past 6 months or so, a lot of the concern was just about how do we level the playing field? How do you get to a point where everyone is operating off the same set of rules? And there has not been a clear answer or a clear pathway to a solution on that. So a lot of the conversation on the national level just had to do with looking at those that we knew were not keeping the spirit of how NIL was supposed to be functioning, and that quite frankly were breaking the rules because there are very few rules in place, number one, but number two, the few that we do have didn't seem to be enforced in any significant way. So you had people who were completely trying to do this the right way, trying to make sure that student athletes were doing some type of work for the compensation that they were receiving, that it wasn't being used to influence enrollment at an institution, that it wasn't being used as an incentive in the recruiting space. And you have people who were going against that in every category, in every space. And so a lot of the national conversation has been, what can we do about that? Who would need to be involved? Is this something where you need to have congressional involvement and have a national or federal law to be able to do it? Or is this something that as an NCAA body we could govern? And the last significant conversation that I remember having about this is that it just seems as though, given that there are now state laws in place, that anything short of federal national intervention is not going to do us any good. I don't believe the NCAA has the ability at this point to be able to do that. And I know at some point we'll be under new leadership at the NCAA national office. And so maybe there'll be a re-engagement and re-involvement about what the NCAA can do in this space. But right now, it just seems as though we're going through this with everybody doing what's either being governed by their institution or their state, and everybody understanding what the foundational rules are, but not everybody following those rules.
And then as you're talking about the competitive playing field, do you see the competitive gap between FBS and FCS widening, narrowing, staying the same now that we're a year and I guess almost a year and a half into NIL?
I don't know if we see any of that as of yet, but it doesn't mean that we won't see it over a period of time. I think as we go year in and year out, you could certainly see a widening of the gap, but part of that will depend on what the FCS programs decide to do. And because you have to make decisions in this space as well, in that at a place like the University of Northern Iowa, we have to give some serious thought to how much we would want our supporters to be involved in NIL, because that's perhaps going to divert their funding away from us. And we're not funded the same way that University of Iowa, Iowa State, or other Power 5 programs are. So when that diversion happens, it has a real significant impact on us financially. And so we have to look and make decisions on whether or not this is a route that we feel like we can go down and still be able to have a successful athletics department and accomplish all of our goals and fund scholarships and do the things that we have to do to be able to have a successful department. So NIL is certainly important, but we can't afford to be in a spot where we have a number of our supporters making such significant contributions in that area that it breaks down what we're trying to do to be able to run our department. And so for us, that's something that we always have to think about. And quite honestly, I think everyone is thinking about that, right? It has a bigger impact on the FCS programs because the funding model is different. But I imagine Lyla would probably tell you that even at the University of Iowa, which is funded differently, they still have to look at what message is appropriate to send to their supporters and donors in this space so they can make sure that their financial infrastructure is intact.
Have you seen any diverting of funds yet?
We have not seen that. That's something that we're always concerned about and thinking of and on the lookout for. But to this point, we don't feel like there's been any significant diversion of funds that support the department toward NIL. We don't know if that will hold up over time, but to this point, it hasn't been a concern.
And then, Brad, have you seen much overlap between the people who are supporting Swarm and the people who are supporting the Iowa Athletic Department through the iClub?
Sure, there's definitely quite a bit of overlap. Some of the biggest donors in the Iowa Athletic Department are also supporting Swarm. They understand that yeah, you need nice facilities in order to compete. But if the players on the field aren't up to standard, then you're not going to have a very enjoyable afternoon or evening at the stadium or arena. And so they understand this. And so, you know, one of the difficult challenges for them or you know, dilemmas that they have, of course, is, you know, figuring out how much to divert, or if to divert any at all. And so we're really trying hard to not make this a competition between the fundraisers for the athletic department and us at Swarm. That's difficult, right? Because they have their needs, and we have ours. And so it's unfortunate that sometimes donors feel like they're kind of put in the middle and they're being tugged at in two different directions. But we're really trying hard to work together with the fundraisers for Iowa Athletics to not make the donors feel that way. But it's inevitable to some level. And I can appreciate where the situation David's in 100%. What I would say too, though, something exciting for say a university like Northern Iowa, if they are able to put together an NIL program, it might really separate them as an FCS school from their peers in the FCS arena. So, I mean, I like to look at this as all opportunity, not a threat.
And then is there a target number that now that you've been at this for a few months and have probably a little more of your bearings down in the NIL world of how much you'd like to be raising annually?
Yeah. I think you might have even asked me this question at the press conference, if I remember right. And I think I said something like $6 to $10 million. I really haven't come off of that. I think $10 million is I don't know if it's a magic number or not, but it's really something that we're targeting. We've raised over $1 million in the first few months. Yes, much of that is from bigger donors, but the masses are starting to catch on, and we have lots of individual smaller donor members as well coming on board. But yeah, I think it's going to need to be in that sort of area in order for us to accomplish everything that we're trying to accomplish. Can we do great things with less? Of course, but that doesn't mean we can't have lofty goals.
And then what was the calculus involved in, so you have football, men's basketball, and women's basketball, to have those three sports and have it be equal among the athletes across all three of those sports?
Well, I wanted things to be equitable, right? So there's your even across all sports component. And in talking to the coaches and bouncing ideas off of them, they felt like their locker rooms would be a whole lot nicer if everybody on the team or on the roster had the same opportunity. And so that really resonated with me. That concept resonated with me, felt fair. And so that's that piece. Now, as far as what, which programs, I think that men's basketball and football were the obvious two that you would start with, just from the standpoint of the revenue that they bring in and the interest level at games and whatnot. But women's basketball, obviously at Iowa, is a big deal. We've got probably the best women's basketball player in the country on our roster currently. Certainly one of the most celebrated anyway. And so women's basketball here is a big deal. And it just felt right to include women's basketball along with men's basketball. I don't like to be accused of being a chauvinist. So it really just felt like the right thing to do there. Wrestling is also a huge deal at the University of Iowa. But if you know much about our wrestling program, they are very astute at fundraising on their own. And they have the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. And so they really had an infrastructure already in place to really help those student athletes. Ultimately, we would love to go to some of the other sports that maybe not as revenue generating or revenue producing, but that's going to take some time. We need to be able to fund the big revenue producing sports first adequately, and then to the extent that we can continue to grow this organization, we'll try to move on into the other sports that may not generate as much revenue for the athletic department.
And then Lyla, are you seeing many Iowa athletes hiring agents for this, or are they mostly handling this on their own?
We do have a good few that have hired brand managers or agents, and for some of them it works well so that they can focus all of their time on efforts, on the field or on the court and in the classroom, and then the agent takes care of all of their activities. I don't think it's necessarily necessary to have to hire those agents. but for those that have, I think for the most part, it's worked well for them.
And then what's kind of your general advice to an athlete who comes to Iowa and wants to take advantage of NIL?
You know, I would say ask a lot of questions. You know, we have just a ton of resources available to them. And that's really what our role is to educate and give them the resources and the tools they need for this space. And so just to ask those questions, and, you know, it does take a lot of work on their part too. You know, the coaches and staff here, they want to kind of tee them up for their opportunities, and then it's up to the student to execute it. And so having those conversations, asking those questions, and just putting in the time and effort behind it in order to be successful. And we've seen a number of student athletes take great advantage of amazing opportunities, you know, and they're not all just about being an Iowa Hawkeye. It's about them as a person, as an individual, and what their passions are. And they're just tapping into that and exploring those avenues. And that's worked well for them.
I've noticed from covering Iowa a lot of different creative ideas of how to take advantage of NIL. What have been some of your favorite creative ideas you've seen?
Oh, goodness. You know, I think some of the favorite ones we like to see is when they're not only doing it for themselves, but they're doing it to help another nonprofit. You know, obviously we've seen student athletes contribute to other student athletes' success. There's been so many different, and sometimes you just get to see a different side of a student athlete than what you're used to seeing on the field or in the court. And if they're in a commercial being silly, and just seeing another side to them, it's good to be able to see the whole person, because there's so much more than just the athlete.
David, any favorite creative NIL ideas you've seen?
I don't know if I have anything that fits in that category. I was just thinking that maybe my favorite piece of this is just seeing student athletes who are willing to and wanting to get involved in community groups and community service organizations on their own, that's the way they're choosing to step into this space. I think we, as an athletics department, we're always encouraging our student athletes to go out and get involved with community service. And we have themed community service events and department-wide events. And sometimes you never know how that's landing with your student athletes. They're involved with it, but you never know whether or not they view it as something that's really important or something that's just a part of the responsibility for being a student athlete. Well, now that they're into this space with NIL, where they can make choices about what they're going to do or not going to do, to see them continuing to go down the road of being helpful to other people, being helpful to organizations that help people in the community. It's just great to know that they have a heart for being involved in those types of activities. And it's not surprising because we know we have great young men and women, but certainly they have a lot of responsibility on them. And so doing things that take additional time, volunteering to do that, setting that up as part of their NIL infrastructure, just says a lot about the kind of young men and women that we're fortunate enough to have.
And then Lyla, we knew that. Oh, go ahead, Brad.
No, I was just going to echo what John just said. I think he was very well put. And from our perspective, you know, being a mid to late career person myself and having children at home, this concept of really while it's not forcing these folks to go into the community to help, incenting them to go into the community to help, what we're hoping is that it makes these student athletes who are already good people even better people, and that this spirit of giving will carry over into the rest of their lives once they leave the University of Iowa, and they'll pass that down to their children, and it'll make the entire state of Iowa an even better place to live. That's really a broader goal and objective of this. Again, trying to turn something that has a negative connotation into something that really, really benefits a lot of people across the state.
And then Lyla, kind of going back in time a little bit, we knew it seemed like the NIL to some extent was going to be coming in 2021, but it wasn't until pretty last second that we knew what exactly it would look like, especially with the various, this state is passing such and such NIL law, Iowa hadn't been passing one. How did your team prepare for that kind of unusual set of circumstances?
Yeah, a number of ways. The NCAA had put out some draft proposals and legislation that they were going to act upon. And so we kind of use that as a starting point, as if this were to get adopted, how would we respond to this? What would our policies and our procedures look like? In addition to that, we took a look at the NFLPA, Third Players Association, through various professional leagues and how they work in this space with their athletes. I mean, this isn't new. It's new for college athletics, but it's not a new space. And so we looked through the professional agencies to see what their policies were, what they allowed and what restrictions they had in place. And so we had an idea of where we wanted to go. And it literally was the last second that the NCAA said, put all those proposals on the back burner. We're just going to do this interim policy, which basically just says it can't be pay for play and it can't be a recruiting inducement. Anything other than that, we're not looking, is basically what it came down to. So we had to revisit our policies, and we didn't want to be overly restrictive or overly permissive. We needed to find a good space that we all felt comfortable with. And it was, you're right, it was working to the last minute of getting that finalized and getting that final seal of approval for us here at the University of Iowa. But we landed in a good spot. We did make one slight change to our policy from what was released on July 1 of 2021. And that had to do with the disclosure. The NCAA proposal that we had been working off of included a disclosure requirement. We were obviously in a state that did not have a state law that required a disclosure, and that was not a piece that the NCAA included in their interim policy. And so we found that very, very difficult to enforce. And so, we do still ask for a disclosure, but there's not a requirement. We started with a 7-day requirement for disclosure, which we spent hours and hours trying to track that down from student athletes. And it was just kind of not the best use of our time. And so we still work with the student athletes on their disclosure. It's a very simple process. It's not an approval process. It's a disclosure process. And so we still live in that space. It's just no longer has the tag of a requirement. But other than that, we're still working under the same policy. We still have the same philosophy with that space. And it's just to continue to provide the students the resources and the tools that they need, as well as doing the same for the coaches as they are, whether it's recruiting in this space or working with their current student athletes in this space along those lines.
And then kind of hard to think this far in advance, considering we're still as early in what else like in 2027. So we'll start with Brad for this one.
I'm sorry, John. It sounded as if, and maybe Lyla and David could hear you on that, but Lila's shaking her head. You cut out quite a bit on that. Could you try to repeat the question?
Yes, it wouldn't be a true virtual conference without some technical glitches.
There you go.
So as hard it is to imagine this far in advance, what do you think NIL is going to look like in 5 years from now, so 2027?
I think the question is, what do I think NIL is going to look like in 5 years? Is that the question, basically?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
5 years. It's a good question, and it's all speculative. I would like to think that in 5 years we'll have a national set of more clearly defined rules. I'd like to think in 5 years we'll have that. And it may not happen until such time that a school or two feels like they have gotten the wrong end of a deal somewhere, and they push their local legislators really hard to draft legislation. But I would expect that. It would not surprise me. Maybe it's not 5 years from now. Maybe it's 10 years from now. I'm not sure. It would not surprise me that at some point that the independence of the NIL goes away, and that the athletic departments can either bring these separate collectives into the fold, or just explicitly subsidize the independent collective. That would not surprise me either. It seems very odd to me that the success of, say for David's athletic department may someday rely upon an organization that he can have no affiliation with. You think about that, that's really kind of crazy. David's even shaking his head. And I've talked to Iowa's coaches about this. For them to now suddenly rely upon me is somewhat crazy, to be honest. And they're relying on me to be successful so that they can retain the players that they have on their roster, and they won't leave to go play somewhere else where they can have more financial opportunities. I feel like that's going to go away at some point. That's just my thought, but I'm certainly, it's very speculative, but I would love to hear what Lyla and David have to say about that.
Yeah, I would probably just throw in that, well, two things. One, I would hope 5 years from now we see a more sophisticated level of student athlete, because they're coming in with this knowledge that's been passed down over time about the right way to do this, much more sophisticated than when I played 30 years ago, where we would have had no sense of how to do something like this. I would hope over the next 5 years, we're going to have student athletes entering our institutions that have a better sense of how to run their own business, their own personal business, how to maximize opportunities, how to make money, and how to do it the right way, and how to be smart and not taken advantage of, and how to use the people that are around them as resources to be able to help them maximize their value. But to Brad's point, there is a swing that I feel like is starting to happen in some ways, with institutions saying, this has all started with us not having any involvement with NIL or with collectives. Is that the right place to be? Is that a sustainable place? Would we be in a better position if we were involved in some form or fashion? Does that give us a better ability to be able to protect and help our student athletes, as opposed to leaving that to others that maybe we have no connection with? And so I don't know if it'll officially move that way, but I know there certainly are conversations where that's kind of going against the grain a little bit from where this all started, that maybe over time we need more institutional involvement and not less.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you on that, David. We will be held accountable for all of these NIL deals, regardless of what our level of involvement is. And so I think to best position us, we need to be able to have direct involvement, and we absolutely need federal assistance with that. It can't be these one-offs. It can't be handled individually or by state. I don't even know if by conference would work. So we do need some national assistance to regulate this and to allow the institution to be directly involved. Not that I want to add that to our plate, but I think to best position and protect both the student and the university, I think we need to be able to do that.
And then question specifically for David, do you expect short term, before we get to that point of more institutional control, schools like you and I having a collective?
I would think so. I know there's been at least some initial conversation with one of our sports programs about the possibility of having a collective this year. So certainly you're going to see that happening at at UNI and other FCS programs because there are community members who want to find new ways to be able to get involved. They want to find ways to be able to support student athletes directly and also support athletics departments. And so for some people, it's supporting scholarships. For some people, it's going to be supporting facilities. For some, it's going to be directly supporting student athletes. And so there's certainly enough need in all of our departments that if you're someone who is a part of a collective, you will be able to help student athletes directly. But if that's not your interest, there are other ways that you can help your local athletics department. So I think for us, collectives are certainly something that's a part of our future and really a part of our present. And I think you will see that at schools that are similar to UNI.
And then a reminder to our attendees that you can submit any questions that you have via the chat function. And then in the meantime, a question for Brad. You're the relative newcomer here to NIL. We're kind of all newcomers, but you especially probably. What's been the biggest surprise to you since you first started Swarm?
The biggest surprise. The biggest surprise has probably just been the negative connotation that NIL has out there, and the ability to overcome that. Even with the structure that we have in place, there's still a lot of skepticism around NIL, and it's going to take a little bit of time, I think, before our structure and our process and all of the good things that we're doing really start to resonate with people. And it's taken longer than I expected. I'm not a very patient person. So that's probably been the biggest surprise.
Does that come up then as you're trying to fundraise some of that skepticism?
Oh, of course. You'll get isn't a scholarship enough? Back when I played, I was lucky to get a scholarship, and now they're getting paid. That sometimes people will act like these guys are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's not the case at all. In fact, if you were to pay these people by the hour and give them minimum wage for all of the time that they're working or practicing their sport, they would have plenty enough money to pay for their scholarship. Or pay for their schooling. But in any event, yes, it does come up, and there are some people that won't even entertain a conversation because it's about NIL, and they think that it's just not something that they can get behind or even choose to entertain getting behind.
How quickly do you think they'll go away?
Well, I thought it would have gone away already. So I was wrong the first time. I think we're probably maybe 6 to 12 months away of really showing the results of what we're doing. Having the student athletes help market it by telling how much fun they're having and how rewarding it's been for them, not just financially, but intrinsically, and the value that they're getting. By getting to work with, I think this morning a lot of the football players were working with kids that struggle with literacy and helping them learn to read better. I mean, that's pretty cool stuff. And these kids these kids are just enamored by these professional athletes, and it makes them want to learn to read even more, learn to read faster. If they can do what the football players do, then maybe they can be that good someday. Who knows? I think it's going to take a fair amount of more time, and it's there's a lot of education. There's an educational gap there that really needs time. That's it.
And then going off that point about how these athletes aren't making hundreds of thousands of dollars, usually at least.
Yes.
Lyla, do you see like a specific number of like, okay, generally these deals are in such and such ballpark range?
I mean, it varies. It's really all over the board. It could be from like $500 for, a couple of social media posts. It could be exchanged for a product. Liquid IV is a big product with college athletes, and up to, 6 figures and plus. And so it's all over the board to vehicles, and it's crazy. And the nice part about it, that where with NIL and its true original sense of it, we also see the same where students are getting paid to be able to do their artwork, to publish their book, to do their music performance, all of those things that is truly for their name, image, likeness. A couple of years ago, I had to work on a number of different waivers just for Dallas Jacobus to be able to play his song. And so this gives them that opportunity to pursue that on their own, without any issues or restrictions. And so I think if we can get back to that space as a starting point, I think that would be helpful, because we see a lot of that.
I guess that's one less headache you would have now. Yeah. If Dallas was still an athlete.
Yeah.
And then, David, are you hearing specific numbers for what your athletes are receiving, or is that more of your compliance staff that's seeing that?
Yeah, I think it's more of our compliance staff. I haven't heard really any numbers on what our student athletes are doing, so I'm not sure exactly what range they're falling in. I'm hoping that it's appropriate for whatever work that they're doing. That's the big thing. You want this to be a good thing for them. I am a proponent of NIL. It certainly makes our jobs more challenging, more things to manage, more things to think about, more things to be accountable for. But the idea that our young men and women have the opportunity to be able to have this, I think is the right thing in the right direction. And so I hope that whatever they're making is commensurate with the work that they are doing and the value that they have to that company or to that agency.
And then, Brad, you've mentioned a couple misconceptions with NIL. Question for everyone across the board. What do you think is the number one biggest misconception right now about NIL? Let's start with David on this one.
Wow. I think I would just say that NIL is a bad thing. That, and Brad mentioned it earlier, I have heard some similar comments as people have talked about it. They kind of lump in NIL with other things that they think are negative about the NCAA. It's like, hey, you got NIL, you got the transfer portal, you got these other things that they feel are ruining college athletics. Now, I can say from my standpoint, it's certainly making our lives more challenging, more difficult. It's not making it easier, and it's a whole new set of things that we have to be concerned about that in my 25 years in the profession, we haven't had to be concerned about before. So in that regard, it does make our lives harder, but not everything that makes your life harder is a bad thing. And so for me, I think if NIL is done correctly, used correctly, the way that it was intended, done for work and for value that's given to a company and organization, people playing by the same rules, following the same standards, a kind of a national set of laws that govern how it happens, I think it can be a good thing. The challenge is that we're not there yet, right? We're not there. And so for many of us, NIL, which I think has a good intention and a good value for student athletes, can really end up being a bad thing because it's just another way for some people to cheat and not follow the rules in order to gain an advantage. And so we have to find a way to clean it up so that the value of it can shine through in a positive way.
Then Lyla, what do you think?
The biggest misconception of NIL?
Yeah.
That everybody's doing it. Last year, after the first full year in that space, we probably only had about a quarter of our athletes actively participating in it. So we spend a lot of time, effort, and energy with it. And for that first year, we only saw about a quarter of our athletes participating.
Do you see it going up this year?
I think so. And I think as more high school students are being permitted to get into that space, and so they're coming in already with different things that they've been used to, I think it'll increase. And as students learn more about it, and maybe that was a good sign that they didn't just jump in before doing some research and kind of figuring things out. But so we're seeing a slight increase. It's not across the board. And quite frankly, the majority of our athletes that were in the space were the female athletes.
And then Brad, your biggest misconception?
Oh, that it's easy to run a collective. That's a big misconception. No, and maybe more to Lila's point, we were just having a meeting earlier today about participation. And this year now, while it may not have come across Lila's desk yet because some of these people haven't done any deals yet, but out of the 157 people that we have eligible in football, men's basketball, women's basketball, we have 116 who have signed up to participate. And so I would say there's an increase in participation, at least in terms of interest and willingness to do things. Now, will they act on it and actually participate? We're going to see. But yeah, so one last thing I think I would say, and I think it's really kind of to David's point and about how it's bad. I mean, I think that the NIL concept was a good one. I think that the transfer portal probably independently was a good one, but it's almost like two drugs that are good that can help you independently. When taken in tandem, I think that could cause a problem sometimes. And I would say that NIL plus the transfer portal, it almost breeds some of or incents the bad actors to act badly. And I don't know if that's part of the point that David was making, but it can really cause some issues when the folks enter the transfer portal, and then it almost looks like it's becoming an auction as to where you have to pay money to get a kid to come out of the transfer portal to go to your school. And at Iowa, that's just not something that that's not a game that we're willing to play. And so that puts us at a competitive disadvantage to some level. But that's also why I'm hopeful that in the future we'll have more clear direction and rules, and hopefully everybody will abide by them.
And then with 1 minute left, a speed round here with this question. If you were a college athlete right now who could benefit off NIL, what would be the top company that you would want to do an NIL deal with?
If I was a student athlete, it would probably be a Tex-Mex company that gave me free burritos or something.
And we see a lot of those.
College kids like to eat.
I would say I'm a native of Louisiana, grew up in Baton Rouge, so I love seafood. There was a place in Baton Rouge called Tony's Seafood, where I could get all of my shrimp, crawfish, crabs, all of that. So I would definitely want to be a spokesperson for Tony's Seafood in exchange for all the crawfish that I can eat.
I love it.
They don't even have to pay me money, just pay me in crawfish.
Etouffee, all you can eat etouffee.
Absolutely. There you go.
I think I'll keep it simple, and I'm going to go with some ice cream. My kids love ice cream every day, so we'll go with ice cream.
There you go.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your insights over the last hour. I greatly enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for putting up with my MediaCom Wi-Fi. And thanks to our viewers as well for tuning in. Still got more sessions to come with this Iowa Ideas Conference, including Dan Gable and Clarissa Chun as tomorrow's keynote speaker. So thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.